Liz and I went back and forth, actually many months, on what my presentation topic was going to be today. And I did some headshots for the JPBG website. Liz is one of them. And she says, why don't you talk about how you edited those headshots? Oh my God. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. And so really kind of my first time going through with Lightroom and Photoshop. I probably have too deep of information. So when I've taken a lot of classes on, stay over here, I guess, a lot of classes on editing and both online and in person. And what I find is that you can't learn much without doing. And you have to continue to do and do and do and do again until it finally sinks in. So I've taken, there's a lady that does a painting class with Photoshop called, her name is Sandra Pierce. And I've taken her class 3 times. And every time I take her class, she teaches me something. I go, oh, God, did you tell me that? Because I never used it. So my goal tonight is to not teach you completely how to edit images, edit headshots. But my goal is to give you a flavor of the tools that I use, at least, and enough. And that's why you had a copy of the presentation, so that when you go to edit a headshot, you can say, oh, I remember Keith said to use frequency separation, and that's going to help me do skin retouching. But I don't remember exactly what he said or how it works. But now you know frequency separation, and you can go out to Google and find frequency separation, and there's a bazillion videos on it. Okay, so my goal is to give you enough information to make you a little bit dangerous. Probably not that you're going to walk away from here as a headshot editor, because I'm not even sure I would call myself a headshot editor, but I know a couple little tricks. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Lightroom, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Photoshop. And if we have time at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about AI. I know that's a topic that everybody's really kind of interested in. I'll start a little bit with editing headshots with AI first, and then a little bit more about bigger images. So let's get started. Feel free to jump in anytime. I'll do my best to answer questions. So just real quick, what are some elements of a good headshot? I think these are all things that we know from photography, right? It's got to be clear and sharp. We have to have good lighting, composition. The expression of the face is really important. I think that was even mentioned with some of the images you guys just showed from your competition, how the expression on that little boy's face really made the image. Eye contact. So you want to really feel like the viewer can relate to the person that they're seeing. And a lot of times what this means is removing distractions. So blemishes on people's face, things like that distract from the actual person themselves. Background, wardrobe, posing is really important. I had a young girl come in who needed a headshot for a play that she was going to be in. And her mother was there, and she was way underage. She was probably 12 or 13, maybe even a little bit younger. And I had her pose like this, and then I had her pose like this. And I showed her mother on the back of the camera the 2 pictures. And it was like she went from 10 years old to 18 years old, just in the pose and her expression. So posing is just really, really important to get right. Color and tone and authenticity. By the way, that's also the link to the presentation. So a little bit about the lighting setup that I like to use. This is not a lighting class. I just kind of want to give you an idea of how I usually set up lighting for things. So I usually use 3 lights. I use I don't have a pointer. The main light down here with the reflector on one side. So you get a little bit of drop off across the face. You get a little bit of shadow, a little bit of drama. Depending on where you put those lights, you get more or less drama. The oval underneath is one of those, I didn't know how to represent it. It's one of those eye lights that go underneath the face that I use. A hair light in the back, and then the light on the left there illuminates the background. So you basically can do a vignette in camera with that light. So that's just my basic setup that I use and adjust a little bit around. So my workflow is I basically have 3 tools that I use for processing images. So the first tool is going to be Lightroom. And this is where I do just some basic edits of lighting and lens correction, things like that, crop. I'll also do, if there's any major blemishes, the heal tool in Lightroom has gotten really good. And this is where, AI is starting to come in a lot, is this AI masking for the person in Lightroom. So if you haven't tried this yet, it's pretty powerful. It's a good first pass if you're not going to go into Photoshop. By the way, I'm going to go back and forth here between Lightroom and Photoshop. So I'm going to show you some. This is not going to be all PowerPoint. But basically what I do, and I'll show you this in a second, is I do masking of the person. And so the AI aspect of this is that Lightroom now will go in and allow you to set up a different mask for all the different elements of a person. First, it finds the person, and then it allows you to set different parameters for each. How many people have used this in Lightroom already? All right, so some of you guys are already good. So I'll show you that in a second. But the next thing I like to do after Lightroom is Photoshop, and that's where things get really detailed and interesting. And then the third thing I use is a software called Nick, and I use Color Effects Pro. And I'm not going to talk about that at all tonight, but I do use a little bit of Nick to give it a little bit of a pop. So let me just switch to Lightroom real quick. Oh. That, yeah, done. So for those that haven't done this in Lightroom, I'm going to actually pick. So if I go in here, again, I apologize for those of you who have done this. You see where it says detecting people? It's thinking. There we go, person one. So now it's detecting the features. So I can do the entire person as a single selection, or I can do a different mask for each different element of this person. I usually don't touch these. So it says create 8 separate masks. So now I have a different mask for all the different elements of this person. This is pretty powerful. So just to start with, you can look at the mask of the face. So this guy, he has some acne and some issues. So one thing I do with that mask is I will take and just reduce the texture and reduce the clarity a little bit. Just kind of softens it up just a little bit right there, right? And then I go through and you can do the neck the same. And then the eyebrows I usually don't touch. The eye sclera is the white of the eyes. And so what I like to do there is I like to increase, actually on the sclera, not the sclera, but what I like to do there is reduce the saturation so that you don't have, reduce the saturation. So basically what you're doing is any coloration of the eye, you're trying to bring out the whites. And then I would also take up the whites a little bit, take up the highlights a little bit. Anyway, you don't need to watch me do all this, but as I said in the slide, which I'll switch back to, there's different things you can do for each of the different aspects. So again, this might make more sense now that you've seen this. So for the teeth, reduce the saturation, enhance the white, increase the texture, clarity, and sharpness a little bit. Again, you can go through all of these different things, but the fact that you have a mask, and here's the really cool thing. If you have taken multiple images of the same person and you want to apply the same masks to that, and you synchronize across all of those images, it will take all of those settings and apply it across all of those. I mean, that's a game changer. And so if you don't use Photoshop or any other type of editing tools, this is a good little trick. Now, you don't want to go too far because these masks aren't perfect. You don't want to really slam sliders one way or the other. But to give yourself just a little bit of a pop on those images, it's a pretty powerful tool before you head into Photoshop. Any questions?
Even if they move, like if the head moves, it still it does that?
Yeah. It basically, what it does is it takes all the information, goes to the next image, and it will find it again and apply all those settings. Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, if I went to imaging last year, and one of the portrait photographers that was there was saying that that same functionality exists on Lightroom that you can run on your iPad. And she says she sits and does all of her edits on her iPad while she's at her daughter's soccer games for her photography. And this is how she does it through Lightroom. So it's a pretty powerful way to get started on images. But Photoshop has a lot, obviously. So, as you know, Lightroom has its limitations. Back to Lightroom for just a second. The other thing in Lightroom is, if we get rid of the masks here, we zoom in. Lightroom also has some pretty good tools for healing blemishes. Now, I'm not an expert at all of these, and so usually, obviously, that doesn't work. But usually I pick a different one and figure out which one works right. So this one, what's that one called? Content aware removal. So this one's pretty powerful. I mean, if you just need to get rid of, some big things in Lightroom, I mean, that's pretty good, right? So if you're doing this on your iPad at your daughter's soccer game or whatever, you can do a lot with Lightroom and never even go into Photoshop. So I typically don't do that much in Lightroom because I'm pretty comfortable in Photoshop. But if you don't have Photoshop or you're not comfortable in Photoshop, it's a great way to get started. You can do a ton of work. Okay. So yeah, Lightroom continues to come out with more and more things that are powerful. Okay, so let's just I think I already have that image open in Photoshop. So we're going to get to the Photoshop part here real quick. Let me jump back to the presentation. All right. So we kind of went through the basic workflow for Lightroom. And again, if there's any questions on that, or if you want me to go back to anything, just let me know. So Photoshop, a lot more details. So Photoshop, this is kind of my basic workflow. Clean up any blemishes that I didn't take care of in Lightroom. Overall dodge and burn. I will be honest with you, I'm not doing a tremendous amount of dodge and burn, but in preparing for this presentation, I did some research on dodge and burn. It's pretty powerful. So we're going to talk a little bit about dodge and burn. There's a lot of stuff you can do with dodge and burn that can really be game changer on your images. The eyes. I spend a lot of time in the eyes. So I like to brighten the eyes, clean them up, sharpen them. You always want to make sure you have a catch light in the eyes. That comes hopefully by the way you shoot. Sometimes you don't get it. You have to make one. So you always want to have that catch light. You want to reduce the yellow in the eyes. So I learned something that basically a baby's eyes, the white of their eyes are actually blue. It has a little bit of a blue tinge to them. And the older you get, the more yellow the white of your eyes gets. So if you want to make somebody look younger, you move their eyes back from yellow to blue. So it's a bit of a trick that you can use. I also like to, of course, whiten and sharpen the eyes. I find the eyes really are what captures me in an image. So I really paid a lot of attention to the eyes. So the teeth you want to whiten and sharpen. The skin, of course, you want to do blemish removal. You have to be a little careful there. You don't want to remove things that people are used to seeing in somebody's image, like moles and things like that. I typically ask when I'm taking somebody's headshots, how far do you want me to go? Is there anything you don't want me to remove? Things like that. So you can go too far with it. You can also really blur the skin to where it looks just like plastic, and that's really not good. Hair removal, you got to remove the flyers, and then how many people use liquify when they do images? Okay, a couple of people. So liquify is very powerful, especially now that it has face recognition. So you can not only remove pounds, but you can change the entire shape of somebody's face, and we'll look at that briefly. And then, as I said, I also go into Nik Color Effects Pro. And for any of you that use that, basically what I do is darken light center, pro contrast, and a little bit of a glamour glow usually. So give the image a little fun. Yes.
So sometimes, things you're shiny, I see the original. How would you, I guess, that?
That would be a dodge and burn. I try to get as much of I try to bring down as much of the highlights in Lightroom as I can, so that you don't have these real hot spots. That looks much worse than it looks on my screen here. That's way worse than it looks on my screen. But that's where dodge and burn can be up. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was for where it's really shiny and bright, how do you get rid of that? Again, I said a little bit of dodge and burn can be helpful on that. You can also blend in other parts of the skin to that area as well. Okay. Any questions? So now I'm going to start jumping deep into each of these different methods. All right. All right. So the first one I want to talk about is the blemish removal. And I'm going to talk about blemish removal using the tools that exist in Photoshop already. And then I'll also talk about a little bit of like skin softening and things like that separately with frequency separation and inverted high pass filters. So the direct blemish removal, you can use the patch tool, the healing brush, spot healing brush, or the clone stamp. So I'm assuming that everybody knows the clone stamp, so I didn't give you many details on that. The patch tool, you want to make sure you set to content aware. You want to use about 5 to 7 for the structure and about 2 for the color for if you're doing skin. This has to do with how much texture and color is applied when you use the patch tool. The healing brush, and again, I'm going to show you examples of all of this in Photoshop in a second. The healing brush, you want to make sure the hardness has to do with the focus. So the hardness of the brush that you're going to use is going to be commensurate with the focus. So in other words, if you have a really sharp image, you want to use a healing brush that has a pretty hard brush. If it's a very soft image, you're going to soften up your brush a bit. The source is going to be the sampled, and then whether it's aligned or not is whether the sample moves. And then the spot healing brush, which is probably the most powerful one. So the spot healing brush doesn't need you to tell it where to sample from. So patch tool and healing brush both basically you have to clone, basically say, I'm going to replace this area with something from this area. The spot healing brush basically uses, again, this AI technology where it basically says, I want to remove this. And it goes out and it looks around and says, okay, well, if that's what you're saying you want to remove, then it must be that. I'm just going to give you what it's going to be. So it's the fastest, so you don't have to actually select a sample. So let's see how all of it works. Sorry, Liz, not going to do you for this one. Loading. Thank you. There we go. connected to the projector. All right, so the first one is a patch. So the patch is pretty simple. You basically you're going to select an area, and then you're going to drag to an adjacent area. So the trick here is that you really want to make sure that whatever area that you're selecting is of similar skin, right? You don't want to come up and select something that's drastically different in color or texture from what you're looking at. And so you can basically go around here, but again, this is a two-step operation. So you have to basically select each little blemish and move it away. So the next one is the healing brush or the healing. So this is where you need to hold down the Option key and basically yes, thank you. So in this case, and I mentioned before about align. Do you see where it says align? So align basically means that it's going to move. If you see when I click, see the little plus that comes up? So it's moving that little plus with me. If I click unaligned, it would keep the plus in the same place. So this is where, again, you have to pick, where do I want to sample from? But it works, right? So take a little while, but it works. And then the last one is this one. And so this is where you don't have to select anything. You just say, I want that gone. It goes out and thinks about it. Takes a little bit longer, I guess. It has to think more. Yeah, this is the spot healing brush. Spot healing brush. And then everybody knows the clone stamp, right? I don't need to go through the clone stamp. It's pretty straightforward tool. Really? Okay.
Different levels.
Okay. So clone stamp is pretty much like the patch or the healing brush, except you just have to basically, again, hold down your Option. See, I have a little target now, and select your target. And the nice thing about that is you can set the opacity, and you can set, the hardness of your brush and the size.
Give him 2 eyebrows.
What's that?
Give him 2 eyebrows.
Okay, good. So that's with the lower opacity, but if I did higher opacity, okay, that's clone stamp. And so it's a very powerful tool. I'm sorry I didn't put it in there, but so clone stamp is very powerful. It's a little tricky for retouching blemishes because you're just copying images. It doesn't really do any algorithms on how to make the copy right. The other tools that I showed you have a little bit more algorithms behind that if you're trying to remove blemishes, things like that. Any questions? Yes, Helen.
Yeah, do you have a particular brush and brush size that you kind of like to work with when you do portraits?
So soft brush, I usually just use a soft round brush, and the size is going to depend on what I'm touching. Yeah. I mean, if I'm touching things like this, I would just make it, as small as you can, right? I'm sorry, did that answer your question? Okay, so back to the presentation. Yes, please.
You start with the easiest one, the spot healing, and if that doesn't work,
yeah. That would be, so the question was, well, which one would I start with? And it would be the spot healing brush is probably the most powerful and the easiest. So yeah, depending on what you're trying to take away. But for these type of blemishes, yeah, something like that. Okay. All right. So moving on. So I want to talk a little bit about dodge and burn and highlighting and contouring. I do not do this. Okay. I'm not good enough to do this, but I want to just mention it to you so that you've seen it somewhere. And at some point you might go, oh, I remember somebody said you can do this. Women probably know this. The men probably have never seen anything like this before because we don't do makeup. But when a woman does her makeup, this is kind of what I believe they're thinking. They want to use dark to contract and light to bring out. And so that's really kind of the idea here about highlighting contour. If you're doing real heavy duty beauty work, or if you really want to make somebody's image pop, you're going to try to use this dodge and burn techniques with keeping this type of thing in mind, right? You're going to try to make those cheekbones look stronger. You're going to try to shape that jawline, try to bring that nose out. Anything that you make lighter is going to look like it's closer to the camera. Anything you make darker is going to be further away from the camera. So this is really just kind of a way to make sure that you keep your image looking three-dimensional and beautiful. Again, not trying to teach this, just want to make sure that you have heard this and that you might at some point look online and see it. So dodge and burn, there's a couple different ways to do dodge and burn. I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk about two ways, and I'm going to do one way that I'll show you. So one is, first of all, I have a Photoshop action for most of these. So for the dodge, you're basically going to use the curves layer. You're going to change the blending mode of that layer to screen, and you're going to create a conceal mask. You're basically going to, does everybody understand the curves layers? Does anybody want me to show what a curves layer does? You do, okay. Thank you. I'll show you. So a curves layer bottom of my screen. That's actually, it's way off the screen. The screen resolution really of the projector. Yeah. All right. So curves. And by the way, curves are also in Lightroom. But basically, the idea behind the curves panel is that I use a monitor that's about this big at home. It's shrunk me down to now I don't even know everything. Liz, any idea? I don't even know why I can't. It's supposed to bring that. I apologize. It's supposed to bring up a curves panel. All right. Hey, what, I'm going to show you in Lightroom what curves are. I don't usually use it in Lightroom, but so basically the curves panel, if you can see it, is, so this is the line that exists for the image right now. So anything down here is dark, anything up here is bright. And this is showing the histogram image of the pixels in the image right now. So if you want to take a curves layer and you want to make things brighter, you're going to basically grab this and drag it like this. So if you want to make just the highlights brighter, you're going to drag it over here, up at the very top. It seems kind of weird, but if you play around with it for about 5 seconds, you'll figure it out. If you want to brighten up all the darks, you do it here. If you want to make everything dark, you're going to do it here. Okay? Just going to drag it down. And then you can play around with it if you want to make the midtones, or if you want to play around with, just the really dark parts of the image. So everything down here is dark. This is midtones, and these are the highlights up here. Okay? So if you go back to the presentation, basically what I'm doing to create a dodge layer is I'm taking my curves layer and making everything bright. And then I'm setting that layer to screen mode. And then I'm taking another layer and making everything dark and setting that to luminosity mode. So that allows it not to change the color. Anything, if you ever use luminosity mode, that makes sure that the color, it doesn't change. It just changes the brightness. Okay. All right. So an alternate dodge and burn method, which you might find a little bit simpler, is this. So basically you create a new layer. You call the layer dodge and burn. You tell Photoshop you want it to be soft light. And then this little dialog will pop up and say, you want to fill it with a neutral 50%. And you say yes. And if you do that and you take that layer and you paint directly on that layer with white or with black, you're dodging and burning. So you're not touching your image at all, but you can dodge and burn an image with that one particular layer. So let's just get rid of this curved layer here. So we're going to just create a new layer. Do it here. So new layer, we're going to call it dodge and burn, D&B. We're going to call it soft light. And see this little thing pops up. Fill with neutral color. Yes. And then I think we have to change. Yeah. So now if I take this layer and I paint on this layer directly, let's just crank up my opacity here so you can see what happens. If I paint on this layer directly with black, I'm burning. If I paint on this layer with white, I'm dodging. Okay, so it's not touching the original layer at all. It's not touching that background layer. And you can do everything just going back and forth between black and white. Pretty quick, pretty easy way to dodge and burn. Okay, does it make sense? Does anybody want me to go through that again? Straightforward. So the interesting thing about dodging and burning is that you can actually do quite a bit with an image with just dodging and burning. So you probably want to start, a lot of these have to do with color, but there are also a little bit of shadows here, right? So like this guy has this little bit of shadow here. So we're going to put it on white. We're going to leave the opacity at 100, and we're going to change the flow to 3%. So does everybody understand the difference between opacity and flow? No. Neither do I, but I'm going to try to explain. So if you're at 100% opacity and 100% flow, then every time you click the button, you're getting 100% of whatever you want to put on there. If you're at 100% opacity and 1% flow, every time I click the button, I'm getting 1% of whatever I put on there. But I can click the button 100 times and it will eventually be 100%. So if I set the opacity to 50% and do 1% flow, I can click it 100 times, but it's only ever going to go to 50%. Does it make sense? Now, the one that I haven't figured out yet is what happens if you set the flow to, so if you set the flow to 100%, which is what I usually do, and you set the opacity to 10, then I think every time you put it on, you put on 10%. And you can keep putting on 10 until I think it's similar to reducing the flow, but anyway, sorry. So when you want to do this, you want to do it real gentle. And so I'm not sure if you can even see how that's lightening up. Can you see it? 3 strokes, right? And now, and this is a young kid, but you get somebody older that has all the wrinkles and everything. You can use this pretty powerfully to just do a little bit under the eye. Right, so it's a pretty powerful tool, this dodge and burn. And by the way, for those of you who don't do pictures of people, still pretty powerful for landscapes and anything else, right? I mean, it's just Photoshop, it's just adjusting pixels, and so it's a powerful tool to have. All right, let's go back to our presentation. So that's the alternate dodge and burn technique. And now's when things get a little bit more complicated. So I have actions that do these things, but this is sharpening and brightening the eyes. So this is basically 3 different layers. So the first one is a bright layer where you basically go back to that tone curve and you're going to brighten up with that tone curve a little bit. The next one is a high pass filter. So whenever you're using, how many people have used high pass filters? Hey, what are high pass filters for, Needs? Sharpening, exactly. So I'm going to show you this directly, but a high pass filter on overlay mode is a great tool for sharpening your images. And then the last one here is an unsharpened mask. And so unsharpened mask is if you go to basically filter, sharpen, unsharpen. I don't know why they call it unsharpened, because it actually sharpens, but it only sharpens edges. Okay, so again, that's why I wanted you to have this presentation so you could see this. But I have an action on this, and I'm not even going to go through it. Basically, you run this action with these settings, and then you can just paint on the iris of 12. Actually, you just paint on the iris, and it's the eyes just pop out. So. Let's do this. So if I just run this action, thing is, what you want to do here, this has beautiful eyes. You want to use a hard brush. God. Brush is so big it killed the whole screen. I might have to unplug and reduce the resolution so I can get my screen back. So I have a hard brush now. So what you basically want to do is just go here and paint white. So I'm just going to crank it all the way up. I wouldn't go this far, but this is what it does. And then typically what I would do is just reduce the opacity to something that I like. Okay, so here's another quick tip. If you click, what is it? Command-Shift-F. So opacity you can set on a layer, but if you click Command-Shift-F, you can actually change the opacity of your last brush stroke only. I'm telling you, that's worth the price of admission tonight. Command-Shift-F on a Mac. I'm not positive what it is on a PC. but you can change the opacity of just your last brush stroke. So you don't have to go and change, you make a different layer and redo it and change the opacity of that layer. Change just one brush stroke with that one click. Okay. Did anybody know that trick? Ah, the veins. Well, so first of all, we haven't whitened your eyes yet, but we would whiten them up first. But let's go back and use this little guy. Oh, wait, I got the actual layer. Probably should. We haven't gotten to whitening yet. But we'd want to whiten them up, right? But those same tools, blemish removal. For sure. Yes.
One thing that I used to do is that I generally have a specific color RGB value. I have it written down in front of me what that RGB value is. Just go grab your paintbrush, set that RGB value, set it to soft, and just.
Yeah, you can do that. You know, another thing, if you look at eyes really close, and this is not the best shot of an eye, because of me taking the picture, not because of Liz. There's actually two different colors in the eye. There is the color that is directly around the pupil is one color, and then this color that is, you guys can see my cursor here. This color is different. So you can't just paint one color, but if you paint both colors and then blend that in, you can do that for sure. Yeah. A lot of times, the other thing that people like to do with eyes is they like to darken. If you do again, go back to your dodge and burn layers. They like to darken the ring right around here. It kind of makes the eye pop a little bit more. And when you're whitening the eye, you want to whiten. You see, you can actually see in Liz's eye here. You see how this is much brighter, and you have a shadow here. You don't want to whiten and brighten all the way to here because you're losing that three-dimensionality of the eye. So you want to whiten more to here. Also, you notice that there's a shadow. Everybody has a natural shadow underneath their eyelid. So this is getting into some advanced topics. We're just looking at pixels now on eyes, right? But there's a natural shadow underneath people's eyes, underneath the eyelid. So you don't want to dodge and burn that shadow away. So you want to leave that shadow, and you want to leave some three-dimensionality in the eye. But I'm not going to have time to go through all of that today. But that's some of the things that you want to try to do, popping people's eyes out. So sharpen them up, highlight that ring around. You can paint it in its color. I even was able to download an iris brush that you can do that actually looks just like an iris, and you can stamp that right on there. Again, that's pretty advanced stuff that you probably don't need to do for most of the portraits that you're doing, but it is definitely something that can be done. All right, so teeth whitening, and this also applies to the eyes. So again, a Photoshop action here. Can you guys see this without me going into full screen mode? All right. All right. So when you're going to whiten, basically what you want to do is reduce the saturation of any color in the teeth or in the eye that is not white. So it's typically reds and yellows that you want to reduce the saturation of. So you can create a hue saturation layer and basically use that to reduce the saturation of the specific colors. And then you can also use the brighten. Again, this is going to be levels adjustment. Levels is similar to curve, but it's kind of flat and a little bit easier to think about. So, and then just paint on it. So let's just do that real quick. So we're going to just this other action. So this is the whiten. So up where I can see the layers. So this is a hue saturation layer that basically reduces saturation of yellows and reds. And then this is going to be just a levels layer. Levels basically just allow you to change the overall brightness of the image. And so from this, if I just paint here, again, white, too much. So this is whitening and brightening at the same time. So again, you got to be a little careful, but you're just going to basically do this around the edges of the eye. A little bit more just so you can see what I'm doing. See, I would do this before I try to take out those red veins, so they stand out a little bit more. Trying to do this with the trackpad is maybe not the easiest. You definitely want to do it a little bit more towards the eye to keep the dimension. All right. So you see that eye really pops a lot more than you started, right? So, I mean, it's kind of a subtle, but you see the point though, right? And having that eye sharp and bright really changes the whole perception of the image. Are there any questions about that? That only works with some of them. Usually doesn't work with me. I need you to drink 3 gallons of water before you come for your portrait. Actually, that does help, actually. Pops up. All right. So that's the eyes and the teeth. You do the same on the teeth. You know, I think it's pretty straightforward. So a lot of times teeth get some yellow on them. So you just want to reduce the yellows of the teeth and brighten them up a little bit. Skin softening. This is about a 5-day class. I think you could probably teach in skin softening. So I'm going to mention the inverted high pass, but I want to talk a little bit more about a different method that's frequency separation. So I've seen this inverted high pass done different ways. The way that I've stated here might not be the same way that if you go out on Google and you put inverted high pass and have somebody come back and show you what they do for inverted high pass, it might be quite different from this. But basically the inverted high pass takes, as we said before, a high pass filter, which is a sharpening, and inverts it and blurs it a little bit. And then that allows you to then soften the skin with that. Again, I don't think I'm gonna have time to go through the details of all this. I just want you to know inverted high pass is a good softening method to use. It's a little bit easier once you get it set up to paste than frequency separation. But I want to show you frequency separation because I think it's really kind of an important tool that you should at least be aware of. How many people have used frequency separation? Nancy. How many people have heard of frequency separation have never really wanted to try it? It is hard, actually. It's hard to wrap your head around, but I wanted to talk to you about it first. I'm not going to go through this slide because it's blah, 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 blah. You have it. You should have it if you want it. Otherwise, you can take a picture of it. I think it's better for me just to show you. So frequency separation. Let's go back to one of these images. So I hope this works. So again, I have a Photoshop action for this, but I will explain the Photoshop action. So so what you do with the Photoshop is you basically create two layers called one texture and one color. So the power of frequency separation is you are separating the texture in an image from the color in an image. And that way you can basically go in and take and make edits on the color without changing the texture. Remember what I said, if you over soften somebody's skin, it starts to look plasticky? Frequency separation doesn't change the texture. It's only going to change the color. Okay? If you want. You can change both. But the power is that you can change them independently. So the first thing it's asking me is to do a Gaussian blur. And it wants you to set the Gaussian blur so that you basically can't see any of the textures. You can only really see the color. And so this takes a while to figure out exactly where to set this. But we're going to set it here at about 5. And it's going to be different for every image, right? So this image isn't as high resolution as some of my other images. So a higher resolution image might be around 6 or 7, or depending on, you know, the amount of pixels that are there. And then basically what it does is it takes and creates these two layers, a texture layer and a color layer. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the texture layer so we just have color. And so when we're dealing with color, remember these blemishes that were on this guy's head? When we're dealing with color, we want to basically, we can use a paintbrush. So for instance, if I wanted to, you could use those other tools that we've talked about earlier, but you're only dealing with the color aspect here. You're not changing the texture. So let's just use a paintbrush here. And we're going to paint, we're going to use the eyedropper, and we're going to select that as the color. And I'm just going to paint like over some redness. Okay. Should back that up real quick. Should be a soft brush. So I'm just painting over some of that redness. So it just kind of all goes away when you do that. But you can see that the texture of that blemish is still there, right? So, you know, another example like might be like right here on his nose. Let's turn off the texture. Let's just use a patch tool. And we're going to just select that little bit of redness right there. Let's turn it back on. See, all of the texture is still there. All the little pores of his nose are still there, but I removed the redness, right? So this tool, let's look at this scar. So this scar is mostly color, right? So if we take that scar and we use the patch on the color layer, you can see that it still has the texture of the scar, but most of the color is gone, right? I cannot teach you frequency separation in 5 minutes, right? I can't teach it to you probably in an hour. So this is something that you're going to have to, like, if you're interested in doing it, you're going to have to like go home, Google frequency separation, and watch some videos and practice. But yes, sir. Yeah. So I find, so the question was, do I find a distinct advantage of using frequency separation over using the NIC tools, for instance? I find that the NIC tools really look plastic. I try to stay away from using too much. I mean, if I use the NIC skin softening, it's like 1%. It's the tiniest little bit. And it's helpful, but you can't really control it like this. I mean, with this, you can really control what you're doing and leave that texture and not make somebody look really plastic. Which with Nick, it's a little bit more of a baseball bat approach, Nick. I mean, even if you use the you know some of the other features in Nick to soften things up, but yeah, does that answer your question? Okay. This is very powerful, but it's not easy, and it takes a little bit of practice and time to figure out how to use it. Any questions? Am I losing everybody? All right, let me sit back to the presentation. All right. So we're going to shift gears now to AI. How much time do I have?
15 minutes.
15 minutes, perfect. All right, so shifting gears to AI. So we're going to stay on headshot retouching real quick. Okay. So how many people love to remove glare from glasses? Does everybody just love to do that? Let's see what we can do here. Now, one caveat I'm going to give you. Now notice I'm going a little bit outside of the glare of the glasses. You do not want to do this over somebody's iris. Okay? An iris is personal to that person. If you do AI over an iris, it's somebody else's iris. Okay? Does not work if you want to go over somebody's iris. But let's just see what happens. Okay. All right, generative fill. I'm not even going to tell it to do anything. I'm just going to say generative fill, generate. How many people have used AI generative fill? Did you guys have somebody come and talk about this? Okay. So this is the new stuff that's coming out with Photoshop. That was hard. And so that was the lasso. Just lasso. Yeah, so not hard, right? So yeah, so what it does is it generates 3 examples. I find the first one's usually good. So that's the first one. That's the second one. That's the third one. If I don't like any of those 3, I can tell it to do it again. Okay? So pretty powerful tool, right? And then you can always edit the layer with regular Photoshop tools that you normally do. All right, let's switch back to, I think he popped now. Let's switch back to Liz. I'm not going to do your wrong, Liz, don't worry. All right. So one of the things I like to do sometimes in my studio, and I did it here for Liz, is I like to put a fan. And it blows the hair and it gets a little bit more volume in the hair, which I like. It kind of looks cool. But the downside of that is flyaways, right? So these flyaway hairs can be a nightmare to edit out each of these hairs. So let's see what generative AI does. So this time I'm going to give it a prompt. I'm going to say remove fly away. Drum roll. Not bad. Okay, so do that a couple times and the whole head. Pretty good, huh? Worth the price of admission right there. Pretty cool tools. All right. Yes.
Is that what guys like us? Could we add there?
Haven't tried it, but you can add. Yes, you can add. Yes. Yeah, you can. It's not perfect, but you can. Yes, 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 yes. If you had somebody that had a lot, it would give you like a step forward in the process of cleaning it up. It's not going to make it look perfect and beautiful, but yeah, it would definitely do better. So I want to just point out in the presentation a couple things. I had like one slide. So you can basically smartly remove objects. You can also smartly add objects. You can also create total backgrounds. So this little girl, her mother called me and said, "Can you take my daughter's picture today?" Today. Okay. And so she came over and she came up dressed as a princess. Well, geez, I got to do something for that. Right. So I created, this was just an AI generated background. So a couple tips. You can basically in Photoshop, I'm not going to have time to go through this whole thing, but in Photoshop, you can basically select subject and then do a mask on everything that's not the subject and give it some prompts and tell it what you want to see there. And so I think I did flower castle background, flowers, and I had to do a little bit of work on what it generated to make it look a little more realistic. It's a little bit of a drop shadow and focus adjustments and stuff. But the nice thing about Photoshop AI, if anybody has ever used like ChatGPT or anything like that, you have to tell it all the different prompts that you want to use. Photoshop AI looks at the image, looks at the light in the image, looks at the brightness of the image, looks at all kinds of factors within the image to figure out what it needs to add to that image or subtract from the image to make it look realistic. So it uses the image itself to figure out how to blend everything together for you. So you don't have to tell it, you know, I want awesome light, I want light coming in from the left and all this. But it does have some downsides. So one of the biggest downsides I want to show you is this, the fact that it will only generate 1024 pixels on the long edge. That's the most it will generate. So let me just open up one more image here in Photoshop. I thought I had it already. Okay, so a couple things that I want you to show you with landscape images. So we've obviously shifted gears from portraiture now. So the crop tool, notice if I click on the crop tool, it has this generative expand. Generative expand. So if I take, you know, sometimes your images are a little bit off. That's not what I want to do. You know, you get this, what do they call it? Transparency.
Well, yeah.
It's, well, I'll show you that in a second. It's really thinking. You guys See that? It just filled all those transparent corners by itself. Not bad, huh? Now, the trouble, where you want to be careful is how good of a job did it do? Because of this 10,000 pixel thing, you can see between here and here, not perfect. Probably good enough for government work, but not perfect, right? So let me just go back to the original image. Now, similarly, if we want to do so let's say we want to make this image bigger, right? So canvas expand, like you're saying. So image, let's see, image canvas size. So I'm going to expand this canvas. I'll show you how this canvas expand works if you haven't seen it before. This basically, this thing down at the bottom says where you want to expand it from. So I want to expand the width of this canvas, and I'm just going to say by 1,000 pixels. Okay. So this is just going to expand one side and give it blank. Now, I can take my tool here and do this and do generative fill and just click generate. And it's going to go through and do what it's same thing it did when I rotated, right? It's going to try to fill that. Now, I can tell you that that image is a lot more than 1,000 pixels on that edge, right? So what's going to happen when I do this is it's probably going to do a pretty good job, but if you zoom in on it, it's not going to be beautiful, right? So you can see how it changed, right? So, and by the way, it gives me three examples to pick from, so I can scroll through them and see which one I like the best. I mean, at a high level, they're really not bad, right? Sure. But the right way to do this, and this is the painful part, is if you come in here to your marquee tool and you say, fixed size. So I'm going to set my fixed size at 1024 by 1024. Now, if I just click, it's going to give me a box, and I can do generative fill. And basically, the right way to do this is to do it box by box by box by box so that I don't lose resolution. So you don't need to sit here and watch it. It works, and it will be better. Still not, maybe not perfect, but a lot better. The resolution is much better there. So you look at 1, 2, 3. So there's still some noise that I'd probably soften, but yeah. So that's how, if you want to make sure that you want to expand a canvas, but you don't want to lose resolution, you need to pay attention to this. I want to stop now and leave time for questions. Any questions? Was this helpful? Okay. Yes, sir. Question. Content aware fill. Yeah. Yeah. So the question was, if I expand my canvas to use content aware fill, is there a pixel limitation, right? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not positive without AI, it's going to do as good of a job as this. So yeah, I'm not sure. Any other questions? Okay, then that's all I have. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, everyone. And if Want to see those of you at Jack Spice, and please help stack the chairs. We have to leave the library with all the chairs stacked. So good to see everybody. See you next month. Remember, come early next month.
I have to get off soon. I don't even know where my Zoom window is. Help.
I'm like,
Does that help? All right.